That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Civil War, the fourth film directed by Alex Garland, which premiered at the 2024 South by Southwest Film Festival, right before A24 is poised to release it on April 12th, 2024.
Do I know an Alex Garland film?
Yeah, I mean, he notably wrote a trio of pretty damn good Danny Boyle films, including The Beach, 28 Days Later, and Sunshine. Also wrote the script for Never Let Me Go and Dread, which I think Dread is highly underrated. But as a director, I don't know that all three of his films are, I think, excellent and worth a watch. Ex Machina, Annihilation, and Men. And we reviewed Men, but I don't believe you saw it, with Jessie Buckley.
What is this movie about? A journey across a dystopian future America, following a team of military-embedded journalists as they race against time to reach D.C. before rebel factions descend upon the White House. What is your pull quote?
Garland taps into contemporary American fear and loathing with this anxious, foreboding road trip, exemplifying the vainglorious pursuits of war photographers and journalists as the ultimate and eternal patron saints of the objective eyewitness. It's a broad statement regarding humankind and rather cynically asks, when will they ever learn?
Mine. Civil War is visually stunning with a thrilling final act. However, vague storytelling left me wanting. The story's pretty simple. There are a couple of journalists, well, a photographer played by Kirsten Dunst and a journalist played by
Wagner Moura, the Brazilian actor.
And they work together. We're told that there's a civil war, but everything about the Civil War is extremely vague. The only thing we know for sure is that there's a resistance called the Western Forces, and they want to take down the current administration. Like, their plan is to kill the president.
California and Texas have seceded, and Nick Offerman plays the president, who we learn is sitting for a third term.
But we also know there are people against the Western Forces, maybe, but I don't know if those people are also against the president or... all of that's very vague. There are no details. I think... I can understand why maybe they tried to keep it neutral and not try to sort of say that, like, so that we can't transpose these sort of movements on things that we're experiencing currently. So I feel like that's smart, but...
yeah, he's trying not to alienate.
But the journalists, their goal is to get to D.C. from Brooklyn to interview the president. But that task is more difficult than we would think because the war has blocked, like, a lot of the West Coast. It's quite dangerous. So they have to take this long roundabout. So going from Brooklyn to D.C., instead of taking 200 some miles, takes like 800 some miles. So the next hour of the film is basically a road trip movie with quite a few obstacles that you see in the trailer. But when they get to D.C...
and you forget that they have two tag-alongs.
They brought along another photographer played by...
Cailee, Spaeny, Jessie.
And another journalist played by...
Stephen McKinley, Henderson, Sammy.
So they get there, and wow, Sammy, he dies.
Sammy dies.
Before they get to DC. But the three of them get to DC, and the next, like the final 30 minutes are, I mean, probably one of the most thrilling segments of a film I can recall. Mm-hmm. We saw this in IMAX, and it was pretty amazing.
It's impressive, yeah.
I would rewatch the movie and I would just go back for the final 45 minutes because I didn't care for the first half necessarily, but that final act in DC where the Western forces are trying to take down the president, very well done. They're successful. In the process, Kirsten Dunst gets killed. The president dies.
She sacrifices herself, basically.
She's trying to save a little girl.
Yeah.
Because what's her name? Priscilla Presley? She...
Cailee, Spaeny.
She's like a new... like a novice photographer.
Yes.
But the president gets killed and the journalist, the handsome guy...
Wagner Moura playing Joel, and Lee is Kirsten Dunst's character.
Before the Western forces shoot Nick Offerman, he asks Nick Offerman, the president, for a quote. He says, I need a quote, and the quote is... don't
let them kill me, right?
And that's the end of the movie.
He's like, that's good enough.
But they kill him, of course.
And one of those people is played by Jojo T. Gibbs. From Dogman and Fresh. That's Sebastian
right.
Stan film. Yeah.
I didn't have many notes because there isn't... I feel like... well, anyway, My first note is I think Nick Offerman might go on my worst hair list.
Really?
That wig was wigging. It's not as bad as old boy in Blackberry. What's his name? The one with the gray wig.
Jay Baruchel.
It's not that bad, but it's like a notch under.
He's barely in it though.
I know, but immediately when you see him, it's like, ooh, wig.
Yeah, he's in
Hi,
the
wig.
he's in the very opening of the film, and then right towards the end. So, yeah. I think there's a whole subgenre now of films depicting women war photojournalists.
Oh.
Like Isabelle Huppert and Juliette Binoche in the past decade have played that. There's a film with Jennifer Jason Leigh called The Moment. And also, notably, Rosamund Pike playing Marie Colvin, the eye patch, the photojournalist with the eye patch who's very famous. Also, who inspired the Emmanuel Bercouf character in Girls of the Sun. So I found, knowing, having seen all of those kinds of films and the dynamics in this, I think the most interesting things about this are maybe the two women, both who are Sofia Coppola alums, because Kirsten Dunst started out with Coppola and Virgin Suicides, Marie Antoinette, and then Cailee Spaeny just played Priscilla Presley.
So I think Kirsten Dunst gave a very strong performance, and I really liked the older gentleman.
Stephen McKinley Henderson. Mm-hmm. He's always pretty good, though.
I found the other journalist, whose name I keep forgetting.
Joel, played by Wagner Moura.
I thought he was very attractive, but I didn't understand that characterization. I didn't picture him as a journalist. I don't see, like, maybe he's a writer, but then he just didn't fit the character. He seemed like a stoner. He seemed like the guy who would drive the van, not like a legit journalist.
Sure, but they're also living. That's why we get that scene where with the car hopping is like these people, and they both. The Jessie character says it to Kirsten Dunst, like, I've never been more afraid, but I've also never felt more alive. And I think there's this high that accompanies this occupation that's dangerous. Like, you could die at any moment, so that sometimes their behavior in this profession is that of being larger than life. And I think that's what Wagner Moura is trying to give as Joel.
I think the dialogue for the cast, so for Wagner Moura and Cailee Spaeny, I don't know, I just thought that they were kind of corny in comparison to Kirsten Dunst and Stephen McKinley Henderson. I thought they had much more to work with.
I agree.
And there were several moments, all the moments where I rolled my eyes were for the two characters I didn't care for.
Well, and also there's supposed to be a flirtation, at least on Joel's end, for this much younger woman. Like, okay.
I really found Cailee Spaeny annoying in this movie.
I think we're supposed to a little bit, though. She's, green behind the ears.
Also,
Wet behind the ears? She's green thumbs, wet behind the ears?
Wet behind the ears.
Yeah.
Her breath smelled like Similac. Because, God, these names, I'm having such a hard time. Stephen McKinley Henderson, he is friends with Kirsten Dunst. And he's kind of saying, like, so where y'all going? Because they're in Brooklyn covering some stuff. And he's like, where y'all going? And Wagner Moura's like, oh, because you want to tag along. And he's like, no, well, yes, I do. And Kirsten says, fine. You're old and he walks with a cane, and it's dangerous out there. So she's like, I mean, if you're willing to get left behind, then fine, you can go. But then we find out the next morning that it's Wagner Moura who meets Cailee Spaeny and says, oh, she can tag along too. And Kirsten seems annoyed, but he's trying to argue with her like, well, everyone has to have a start, and you were her age when you started, and you were just like her. But I think the connection between Kirsten Dunst and Cailee Spaeny's characters, it didn't make sense to me. Like, she immediately takes on this, like, not immediately, but they're only on a road trip for like 2 days. And by day 2, not even day 2, like by the middle of day 1 on the road, she seems to be like nurturing to her and very protective of her. They also do get into a few extreme situations.
Which kind of bonds you.
And accelerates the thing, yeah. I think there are a few exhilarating moments throughout the road trip because, it's like wash, rinse, repeat. Like, they get stopped at a point and then some people with guns try to attack them and they get out of it. But I did think those moments worked well, specifically a moment that's in the trailer with Jesse Plemons.
Kirsten's husband, yeah. Yeah, that's probably the creepiest moment because him and this other soldier are digging a mass grave and throwing lime on all these bodies they're dumping in there.
Well, let's talk about how they get there. So Wagner and Moura, there's a car chasing. So at this point, Kirsten Dunst is driving this big excursion SUV that has press pass printed on the side, which we need to talk about. But she's driving and she's like, I think someone's following us. So of course they're nervous. And then we see this Toyota Land Cruiser pull up playing loud music. And it turns out it's these two, and it's important to know they're Asian, these two Asian guys driving, but they're friends of Wagner Moura's. Like they're also journalists. And they're driving all crazy. And they have a moment where they like jump between cars. Like Wagner Moura jumps.
He doesn't.
Or I'm sorry.
The character Tony, played by Nelson Lee.
One of the guys jumps into the excursion. And then Cailee Spaany's dumbass jumps into the Land Cruiser. And then they take off. And the Land Cruiser somehow is driving so much more fast and gets way ahead of them, and they finally catch up and see that the Land Cruiser is like stuck on the side of the road and no one's in it. So of course they get scared, they go see what's up, and that's when we meet Jesse Plemons and one of his guys, and they have taken the two, and they end up killing the two Asian guys because Jesse Plemons is like, what kind of American are you? And when they say they're Asian, he just shoots them.
Where they're from.
Like where they're from.
Because Tony says he's from Hong Kong, but he wants to make like the three others are from one of the
United States.
One of the United States. Yeah.
So that was a very jarring scene, but the best part of it is Stephen McKinley Henderson, he told them, like, I'm not going up there. Like, everything in my spirit is telling me that this is not going to end well. So Kirsten's like, well, stay your crippled ass behind. And he does. But then right as Jesse Plemons is about to kill, because he already killed the two Asian guys, right as he's about to kill the rest of them, who pops up in the excursion? Stephen. And he runs over Jesse Plemons and his other guy. And that's how they're able to escape. So...
But Stephen McKinley Henderson gets shot.
He does, and then he ends up dying at a Western Forces post in, I think, Charlottesville, North Carolina. Yeah. So that was probably the only moment I kind of felt something.
And it's also a moment where Lee, the Dunst character, is going through a transformation herself. Because there's an earlier conversation, she's trying to get Jesse to stay behind. She's like, I don't want you to come with us. This shit's dangerous. And Jesse says, well, would you photograph me if I got shot? And Kirsten Dunst says, what do you think? Like they almost have dialogue that is like this hard-nosed film noir dialogue from the 40s sometimes that doesn't quite fit. But then Dunst, we see, has taken a picture of Sammy's corpse in the back of this vehicle, and she deletes it. And then she has kind of a mental breakdown by the time they get to DC. It's like she's rediscovered her sense of humanity almost through all this.
My other issue with the story, like some of the dialogue, and I also think like the trailer and the premise would have you think that we're following these journalists across the country to witness like why the Americas have gotten into or why the United States has gotten into a civil war. So I thought we were really going to get like, because they're journalists, they're going to paint a portrait of what's happening. That's not what this is. It's a road trip movie and an action movie. The final, I mean, it's like a heightened Expendables kind of. I mean, that's how it feels, really.
Elevated action.
So then there's that. But then I also didn't get a sense of, like, the way particularly Kirsten Dunst and Wagner Moura's characters behave as the story progresses is almost like they are new to this. Because we understand that her character's been to... she's famous. Like, she's famous off of going to all these war-torn areas. So I kind of found like her reaction to what was happening at the end a little strange, except that maybe because it's hit home.
I think we're supposed to, because she tells Stephen McKinley Henderson, like, I used to think, which I think is a key moment in the film's dialogue, is she tells him that I used to think when I was sending photographs back home, it was as a warning, like, don't do this. And then here we are. And I think there is something about when it's happening where you are, where you're from, like there's no escape, because you can travel to all these places, to all these war-torn countries, but you always get to come home if you live, right?
I think that's the message of the movie, is like it's a warning, because like she said, I thought all the pictures I took of war-torn areas that weren't the United States would make us believe that we need to maintain peace here. So the fact that this is happening is like, it's supposed to be scary. But then Wagner Moura's character, after Stephen McKinley Henderson dies, and then they get to the Western Forces outpost, and they're told by the Western Forces press that, oh, the Western Forces already took over DC. They have the president. It's like hard to tell why he's upset, but we see him screaming, and
I thought that was because Sammy died, but
I thought that felt kind of like, I don't really get what he's doing right now. Like, if he's a seasoned journalist, he should know that these things happen.
But even seasoned people have to express their emotions.
That's true, but I don't know. It felt kind of like
Hokey.
Sure. Okay, getting back to the whole press thing. The reason I wish that the Civil War wasn't so vague is because the first scene we get with Kirsten trying to photograph like a violent scenario, they put on these like reflective vests that say press on them, and they're really moving around like people are really going to honor this vest, even though we get a car bombing. And so then I feel like, what is the environment that they really think people give a damn about the press? We also don't get a sense of like, how is information being disseminated?
Right. I think the film oversells that there's the sanctity of the press.
Well, and an infrastructure to get new like information out there.
Right. That in where complete anarchy and chaos, maybe not complete actually, but in areas where that has broken.
Well, that's confusing to me too.
Do you think anybody's going to care? And also, who are you covering? Are you covering the side that is fighting, that believes that you are going to convey their message in the best possible way? Because like, it made me think of The Purge and how there would be no press covering the anarchy going on in The Purge. They would be murdered.
Well, they do make a comment that says like, it's not our job to interpret, like we're just supposed to collect, and then the people interpret what we collect. So it makes sense to me that they're not taking sides or trying to choose a side. I'm just confused, like, what is the condition of the United States right now that they need to be doing this job? And then, like,
I don't believe with the degradation that's going on in the chaos. I don't believe that these people would be fine with them just kind of like parasitically just kind of getting in the way.
Well, because at several places they're like, here's my, like, they're asking, where's your press pass? Here's my press pass. And then we have these soldiers who are like shooting, killing people without any regard. But then, especially the final 30 minutes, the one character, the lady from Dogman, she's really like watching out for the three of them. And I just couldn't believe that they would even care about these random journalists, especially when they have their own Western Forces press.
I think that's the coding to show that this is the side that's in the right.
I almost felt like there's a secondary message about the importance of the press, and that the only way to like get fair interpretations of the state of the world is to maintain the integrity of the press, which I find ironic because nowadays there is no integrity in the press. Yeah. So this feels like this movie shouldn't be set in the near future. It should be set like 30 years ago.
There's kind of an archaic quality about how it's handling the press. But I agree that it's kind of frustrating not really knowing that neither side that's causing the Civil War or the factions that are the Carl Glusman part where he's like, he's not really saying what he's fighting for. It's just there's somebody shooting at us in a house and we have to kill them first. Like it's become degraded in a sense to that. But I also think that there's a silver lining to that vagueness because it's just like, as an American, seeing this kind of footage in a war-torn country that's not here, it doesn't matter to us what the local political environment is that caused this kind of violence. The message is supposed to be that this violence is inhumane and unacceptable. So I think that what the point of Garland's film ultimately is, it doesn't matter if these are Republicans versus Democrats versus whatever. It's just that letting ourselves be degraded beyond the parameters of civilization is unnecessary and should be avoided at all costs.
The film is effective and like I felt uncomfortable. I felt fear at the idea of like, could this happen? So I think in that regard, it's successful. It's also very successful as an action film. I think the downside is it didn't feel fun. Like I
definitely not.
Like I wouldn't want to watch it again, except maybe the final act because it was so well done. And I don't know, like, my fear also is like how people will interpret the movie. Oh,
there are going to be wildly different reactions and interpretations to this. And I think the film still is really taking it quite safe.
Yeah.
I think it's the ballsiest thing about it is this is coming out in an election year in the country the way that it is now. But yeah, I think Rob Hardy, the director of photography, should be praised, who has shot at least Ex Machina and Annihilation for
I was
Alex
so
Garland.
impressed with the cinematography.
The score, I think the soundtrack selection is also really interesting
Yes, as well.
because it's juxtaposing this kind of, this terrible violence. Like there's a scene where we get, it's from Kirsten Dunst's Memories, where this is he an African man that is lit on fire in a tire?
Oh, yeah.
Like that shit's hard to watch. But the soundtrack, look, who is it in? Like De La Soul? I'm trying to think. Some of the songs I didn't know, but it's like that. It kind of has this weird feeling to behold listening to that music.
Well, I
with these
interpreted the
images.
soundtrack selections as sort of representing different, because there's like rock music and then sort of like urban music. And so painting a range in a way that might indicate what some of the issues are that led to this upheaval. The only thing I don't know if I mentioned this, the only thing we know about what the president, Nick Offerman, did was dismantle the FBI. So if that feels very random, but the implications of that are obviously immense. But
I think we didn't talk about the scene because I think you didn't like it, where it's mentioned that some of these journalists mentioned that their parents are in Missouri or Colorado pretending that this isn't happening. So not all of the country is embroiled to such a degree as these specific areas. But on their road trip, they find a neighborhood where it seems untouched by what's going on. And they stop at a clothing store and Kirsten Dunst buys a dress. I don't know if you wanted to talk more about that scene.
well, just this idea that they think that, oh, this is like, they don't understand what's going on outside because the person running the thrift shop says, oh, we choose to, like, we don't think it's helpful to engage in all the nonsense around us. But when they're done shopping and they go outside, Stephen
McKinley Henderson.
he tells Kirsten, like, be discreet, but look up at like the top of the buildings, and we see snipers up there. So they really are aware of what's going on. They're just trying to preserve this little pocket. But I think the message of that was because we hear from two other characters saying, oh, my parents are in their farm here and there, and they're pretending this is not happening. So I think, part of the issue is complacency, and that's what that represented.
Well, to me, that was like the most Americanness of it, is that we have the ability in this country to live in our own we can curate our own little bubble and ignore damn the rest of it all. And I think that, I don't know that scene is the best way to convey that, because I thought it was a little corny, but I also think that was one of the more troubling moments as well.
What would you give this movie?
3.5.
I would give this film 3.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.